Hello everybody! Which is the poorest continent on the planet? If you say Africa, this answer is almost instinctive. Now what is the richest continent on Earth? If you say America or Asia, the answer is less affirmed, and if we tell you that the poorest continent is the richest on the planet, surprising, isn't it? Let us explain this paradox in today's video. But before we get to the heart of the matter, don't forget to subscribe. Now that everyone is subscribed to the channel, we will continue with the video. Let's start. The richness of the continent. The history of Africa is closely linked to that of humanity. In fact, the scientists locate the first known hominids in East Africa. Its history don't continue without pitfalls, because Africa is a continent courted and desired by the colonialists for its natural resources. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, this continent, which is currently made up of 55 states and more than 1.4 billion inhabitants, is home to 54% of the world's platinum reserves, 70% of diamonds, 40% of chrome, and 28% of manganese. The continent is rich in other minerals such as cobalt and copper, which we find in our smartphones, iron, uranium, and coal, but also gas and oil. The UNDP, which is the United Nations Development Program, recently revealed that 19 of the 46 countries in sub-Sahara Africa have significant reserves of oil and gas, coal and minerals, and 13 countries are currently exploring for new reserves. We all know that almost all commercial products were first extracted from the earth, whether it be our smartphones, computers, televisions, consoles, etc. These objects which make our daily life are resulting from mining, and in particular from Africa, so the mineral resources represent an enormous source of incomes and wealth. But the World Bank and the aggregate still estimate that Africa is the poorest continent of the world. It is more than paradoxical, isn't it? A paradoxical richness. Countries rich in natural resources such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia and Mozambique, Mauritania and Guinea live in a troubling paradox of poverty and abundance. Indeed, abundance of resources does not always translate into economic growth and sustainable development. Let's take the case of Guinea, which is endowed with some of the most coveted mineral reserves on the planet according to the Financial Times, including 40 billion tons of bauxite. Yes, bauxite. This rock allows the production of aluminum, but not only that it is the largest reserve in the world, it also has more than 20 billion tons of iron, fluor, diamonds, gold, and undetermined quantities of uranium. Despite this natural abundance, 55% of Guinea's 11 million inhabitants live on less than $1.25 a day, and the country ranked 178th out of 187 countries in the 2013 by the UNDP Human Development Index, which measures the standard of living in countries. In addition to its mineral resources, Africa has great potential in the agricultural and agri-food sector. Here we will take the case of Ivory Coast to illustrate what we are saying. With nearly 2 million tons of cocoa beans produced each year, the Ivory Coast provides more than 40% of the world's cocoa supply, making it the world's leading producer. But it's not just about chocolate. Africa also produces corn and dates, coffee and salt, cotton and fruits, peanuts and other foodstuffs. That also attracts other continents and countries like China, which has been looking to exploit the African territories, which are considered to be the future of the agri-food field. Object of covetousness. But then why is the world's poorest prize still awarded to Africa? One could simply point to the export restrictions and the difficulties of the mining sectors to employ directly in the country or region concerned. This answer would be only the visible part of the iceberg. As we said before, Africa is a naturally rich continent, so it is logical that the neighboring continents are coveted, and this since centuries. If in a general way we concentrate on the triangular trade and the European conquests of the 19th century, we can go back to the Roman or medieval period, depending on the definition we give to the term colonization. In fact, the ancient Greeks and Romans, Arabs and Males, all of them established colonies on the African continent, which some of them lasted for centuries. Followed by the arrival of the Europeans, the horror of the human trade, the slave trade, and the culmination of this domination through the possession of land. The colonization. We have to find new lands from which we can easily obtain raw materials and at the same time exploit the cheap labor offered by the natives of the colonies. The colonies provide is also a dumping ground for the surplus goods produced in our factories. That's what Cecil Rhodes said, apostle of colonial expansionism. The hazards of a pseudo-independence. With such deep motivations and this will to extend its authority, how even after decolonization the system of expansionism would have no consequences. Post-colonial studies developed in recent years have shown that colonization has left sequels, such that Africa is still struggling to recover. The majority of the decolonization process took place after the Second World War in a fragile climate. The countries obtained their independence by various means, such as nonviolent pressure and diplomacy, negotiations, and sometimes violent armed conflicts. The struggle towards independence of each country was different, but each country was impacted by this process. The example of language, although at first sight very simple, but is nevertheless very symbolic. Almost all the formerly colonized African countries continue to use the language imposed by the colonial power. Their identity is time upset after years of occupation. In fact, this example shows that the first consequences of colonization and by prolongation of decolonization are cultural and identity related. The decolonization of Africa has also had considerable consequences on its socio-economic system, causing the weakening of its growth and the lack of infrastructures, the unorganized labor force, and the hordes of other related problems that have impoverished the African states beyond imagination, and although they are rich in natural resources. In fact, the African states could hardly process their goods themselves, which inevitably made them dependent on other economies, and even that of the past colonizers. These shortcomings prevented Africa from reviving its economy after the decolonization. In the long term, colonization and the exploitation of natural resources have caused Africa to lose billions of dollars. Added to this, the political disorders and civil revolts that have often affected the already delicate stability of Africa. Blameworthy leaders. The borders created by the colonizers come to trouble, political or ethnic clans are formed, and civil wars begin, some of them leading to genocide. The important places left by the colonizing leaders will fetter it and feed the political ambitions of some interested individuals. That's how many African countries sank under the rule of formidable leaders like Emperor Jean Bedel Bokassa. And the full title is no less than the Emperor of Central Africa by the will of the Central African People United in the National Political Party, and who will become thereafter president for life. This last one was as much known for his immense fortune, and his chair does not worth less than $140 million. This leads us to the second point that can explain the poverty of Africa, and this despite its wealth. In fact, if colonialism has impacted on the development of Africa, we cannot hold it as the only responsible for the African situation. Because sociologists have shown that former colonies of Europe did not collapse in this way after the decolonization. We cannot therefore make this result an intrinsic consequence of colonization. The African situation is also the result of bad policies, most of which were freely chosen by African leaders after independence. They took control of countries where the repression of political division was already firmly established. For example, instead of repealing laws on censorship and arbitrary detention, the African leaders kept them and even developed them. They also reinforcing and clinging to the old system left by the colonizer. The Soviet model also inspired African leaders who chose to imitate the institutions and economic policies of a power that at that time represented the exact opposite of the Western free market and democracy, approaching the dictatorial aspect of a political system. It was only in 1990 that Africa broke away from communism and returned to socialism and the global economy. But Africa remains the continent with the least economically free and the most protectionist continent in the world. A scourge of corruption. In Africa, the poor governance we have just briefly described is not simply a problem of management or political choices, but also a problem of corruption. Many African countries rank among the worst performers in terms of corruption according to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. Somalia, Sudan, Equatorial Guinea, Burundi, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Chad, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Kenya are at the bottom of the ranking, and only the following 4 countries are among the 50 least corrupt countries in 2011. Mauritania and Cape, Botswana and Rwanda. The corruption of African elites has various motives. It can serve to enrich the social prestige of the man in power as well as that of his family or potential collaborators. It is also a political resource, or a need to transform goods into money, or the ability to invest. Mr. Bokassa, the megalomaniac emperor we spoke about before, has been accused of numerous corruption charges, some of which involved one of the big French heads. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was at the heart of diamond corruption. Diamonds being one of the first resources of Africa, they are in the center of numerous political and economic scandals. If you have not seen it, we advise you and invite you to watch the movie Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio. It is a cinematographic pamphlet showing with accuracy the corruption of African states, the theft of African natural resources by Western powers, and the fratricidal consequences in the countries concerned. Finally, the most important funds are laundered and used to satisfy the need for magnificence, for shares and wealth of its immensely rich leaders. The fortune becoming thus a true attribute of leader is a political virtue, which must be visible and known of all. According to the authors of the book State and Corruption in Africa, Gerard Blondeau and Jean-Pierre Olivier de Sardin, if corruption persists, it is because no one is offended by it, whether from outside the country, where it is in the interest of the country, or from within the country, because in many African societies, getting rich, even illicitly, is not perceived as an evil in itself. On the other hand, getting rich without sharing is considered unethical. Worse, the one who has not been able to seize the opportunity when it presents itself will be suspected of having eaten alone. Corruption is an accepted way of managing social relations. However, revolt movements and military coups tend to show an awareness of the people and a will to free their country from the yoke of corruption. In summary, despite its immense wealth, Africa has been a victim of colonization, mismanagement, and corruption of its leaders that have negatively impacted its socio-economic system. Foreign countries and former colonizers have been able to use this wealth to develop under the eyes and with the agreement of the African high commanders. However, Africa can count on the freshness of its human resources to counterbalance the trend and revive its economy. But we are interested in your opinion. Tell me in comments, the natural resources are blessing or a curse. If you still here, don't hesitate to like the video and subscribe. We will conclude this video on these words of Olivier Moussan. The future of the world is in Africa. See you soon.